Game Masters, today you can take a break because this video is not for you. Hey fellow Game Masters, I'm Richard Quiner and welcome back to the RPG Daily, your daily dose of all things tabletop role-playing games, helping you build your world and master your game. If you're new to the channel, my name is Richard. I make a lot of videos here about tabletop role-playing games, mostly Dungeons and Dragons for now, but they have plans to change that in the near future, looking into other systems that might be more fitting for the current times and what we expect from our game. Like I said before, the title, Game Masters Can Take a Break, because this video is for the players. Tabletop role-playing games have grown in popularity immensely over the last several years, and because of that, the demand for GMs is outrageous. You practically can think that you want to try being a DM and you'll find players. It's almost that easy. It's great because there's a lot of tools and information and ideas for game masters to use to run their games and make their games as good as they can. But I've always thought of tabletop RPGs as a team effort. It's the game master and the players working together to tell this story, but I've also noticed this significant lack of resources for players to be able to be at the same level and to tell the same stories as we expect our DMs. It's kind of like we looked at the whole system and we said, if we have a good game, it's the game master's fault. If we have a bad game, it's also the game master's fault. But we never look at the players and say, oh, if we have a good game, the players made it a good game, or we haven't looked at the players and said, well, the players kind of made it a bad game. We don't look at it that way for the most part. So today's video is all about giving you more tips so you can help elevate the game at the table that you're sitting on and help your game master run a better game for you. Before I dive into these tips, understand this isn't about the game mechanics. This isn't about how to roll the dice a specific way to make things easier. This is really about how to help you kind of get a little better at role-playing and to embody the character a little better at the table. And of course, this is my opinion, and if you have a different play style that you like to play, this doesn't even matter, because I know some players like a more game-type scenario where it is about dungeon crawling and killing enemies and rolling the dice, and that's totally fine, but this video is more for the people who want to dive into the role-playing side of things and get a little more into character, I think, or might not know how to do that. The first tip I bring up, I've mentioned it a lot on my Discord, and I always tell new players, I say, after you make the character and you deal with all the numbers, stop worrying about the numbers. Don't worry about the dice you have to roll. Don't worry about your modifiers. Don't worry about what your character is good at on the page, because once you're in the game, think about the activities you want your character to do. If you think about the actual things, the physical activities that you want your character to be doing, and you present those to your game master in the game, they will then tell you what to roll. It might be something you're good at, it might not, but the fact is you won't be focused so much on, oh, I'm really good at investigation, I have to do something to be able to investigate. Instead, you'll be focused on, I want to look at these bodies, and your DM will even tell you even if you have to roll. So that's kind of the first step. I see a lot of new players approaching the game, trying to ask for the rolls they want to make. When I want to tell them, don't worry about the rolls, tell me what you want to do, and I will tell you if you're going to roll or not. I really think the idea of focusing on your activities instead of your roles lets you just live in the world and be present in the moment of things that are happening rather than trying to look at your sheet and see what you're good at that you can use in that exact time. The second tip I have for you is for your character to have and work towards a goal, a real goal. I have to do a whole other video on character backstory because I think there's a lot of things we can dissect in how to make a good backstory for players, but real quick hot take on this that you might disagree with, you might not. I think the statement of your character going out to seek riches and fame is kind of a cop-out. It's just not a compelling backstory to me. I don't like it when players use that. I try to work with it, but there are so many more goals and things that your character can be trying to accomplish in their life. So I think if you, as the player, set a specific goal that you want to accomplish as a player, maybe you want to become the strongest knight ever in this certain kingdom, that might compel you to act a certain way. It might compel you to accept stronger challenges than you are currently able to take on. It might push you to seek out pit fighting or some other activity that the game master might not have thought of originally. The best thing that I ever did to my game as a role player when I play was when I decided to stop being a passive player and just let the GM feed me the world and feed me the story. Instead, I decided to be an active player, where every session I would come to the game with goals, things I wanted to do in that session based on what we had done before, and I would try to work towards those. It gave me something to actively try and do, while also leaving a little wiggle room for when the DM threw some wrench in the system or had something that we were supposed to chase down. That's really the goals I'm talking about, is just something to give your own character motivation. There have been so many videos and so many talks and information on how for the DM to give the players motivation to do something in their game, but I think it's also part of the player's job to find that motivation themselves. Number 3 on this tip is to roleplay during combat. I still struggle with this as both a player and a DM. It's not the easiest thing to do. As a GM, specifically when you're running a fight and you have 6 enemies and you have 6 players and you're juggling things, it's really hard to remember to roleplay. But I think it's important to try and remember that you're still telling the story, you're still in this moment, and you want to make it as exciting and interesting as possible. So for DMs, you go do that. Work on your roleplaying during combat, bring in your players. Players, though, this tip still applies to you. You don't have to only rely on the DM giving you roleplay moments in a fight. You can look for those moments yourself. My favorite thing I see is whenever a player decides in the middle of a fight that they want to talk to the enemy, sometimes I freeze up because I have a hard time figuring out how to, deal with that in that moment, because I really want to just have this whole conversation right then and there, but I know it doesn't quite work with the flow of combat. There's a whole lot of complaints we can have about D&D combat, but I get excited when players do that. One way you can do that is think about the situation and if it really requires combat, or if it's a big bad enemy, someone that your players have been looking for a while and you don't understand why they're doing the things they're doing, you might ask them outright why they're doing this thing. The other thing that is like a bare minimum I always think is to describe your attack. Instead of saying, I make an attack, I shoot my bow, I fire an arrow, fire my bow, shoot an arrow. I don't know the order of that. Rather than saying that, you can describe in more details. You can describe what it feels like to pull the bowstring back to your ear to let loose an arrow. Describe what it feels like to swing the weight of the sword at your enemy. And when you do that, you bring an extra life to the game table that most players probably don't expect. And I'm only speaking this from my limited experience running 3 campaigns and stuff over the course of the year and meeting quite a few players. I think it's kind of rare for a player to dive into their combat experience that deep. One of the greatest tips I ever heard was from another D&D YouTuber who had much more experience than I do right now. But he said, when you're the player, when you start your turn in combat, start it first by giving a brief review of what the previous player did in their turn, but phrase it in a way so it sounds like your actions are happening at the same time. Use the words wow. Wow is a good one. Or as blank. So as Kazella swings Squishy at his enemy's head, I duck underneath their halberd attack and stab at them in the ankle. Something like that. Very simple idea of tying it into what the other characters are doing gives it a little more life, makes it a little more descriptive, almost like watching a movie in your brain. And yes, I said only do it with once, but you don't have to only do it with one player before you. You could go back to the 2 players back, 3 players back, and recap what everyone was doing in that time. Obviously, don't get too crazy with it because you still want to keep the game flowing, you want to keep things moving, but it's a way to insert your character's actions and make it feel like everything's happening at the same time. It's wonderful. Tip number 4 is an interesting one because I've run some public games now. I've run some games with complete strangers. I've run some games with really good friends who decided to try and play the game. And this is a common one that I see as players tend to latch on to NPCs. They tend to want to talk to the non-player characters in the world to find out what's going on in the world, to find out more about the adventure, more about things, right? What is going on in the DM's mind? They want to know that information. So my tip number 4 is really simple. Talk to your adventure party. Have moments where you have a conversation with another character in the party. And it doesn't have to be deep, philosophical conversations. It can be meaningless conversations. You could say, hey, have you ever kissed a goblin? That's the start of a conversation. These kind of interactions, you're able to build rapport between the characters, right? Which is another thing that is a common problem, where you have characters coming from all different backgrounds coming together for a certain cause. By having conversations, getting to know them, it's just like making friends in real life, but it's kind of like that, where you have conversations, you build rapport between the characters, and you can find out about their backstories by having these conversations. Every player comes to the game with this backstory that they want to have a part of it, but a lot of times, just from what I've seen, a lot of players are really a little hesitant to share the information about their backstory. There are some who are too sharing, like they'll sit down at the first session, and as soon as they meet the party, they will spill their whole backstory out, and that's fine, that's one way to do it. But then there's others who want to go a more subtle route, but then they get a little too subtle where they don't share anything. So, and I think part of that is because they don't have conversation. I always try to get my players, when they're stopping for a short rest or a long rest or having a new piece of information come in, I try to nudge them to say, what do you talk about? What are you thinking about? What do you want to do in this moment? It doesn't always work, mind you, but I think from a player perspective, the most fun you can have is, you know, when you're settling in for a long rest and you decide to have a conversation with another character, or bringing the whole party and have a conversation in character with them about something going on in the world. It'll also give your DM a little break. You know, they can just sit back and watch. And there's just some pleasure from watching a party converse and interact without the DM having to be the one nudging them together. Tip number 5 is more about finding the adventure in the story. And I say, pull on the threads that your GM is presenting. I say it this way because DMs, we don't want to treat our players like they're stupid, because you're not stupid. We don't want to treat them that way, so we try to make our threads and our plot points very subtle. We try to be a little, you know, mysterious about it. We try to be cryptic sometimes. We don't want it to be too obvious, but we also sometimes can make those too subtle, and so you miss the idea, or you hear something and you might think, oh, that's interesting, but that's not the main thing we're talking about. That must not be important. So I say, as the player, latch on to things, find the little things. I'm not saying when your DM describes a tavern and they mention, you know, there's a mysterious person in the corner. Well, in that moment, if they say there's a mysterious person in the corner, go talk to the mysterious person in the corner. Don't say, are there any goblins around? The meme is Boblin the Goblin, right? Don't go looking for Boblin. Look at the mysterious character. Go talk to the mysterious character in the corner. As a DM, I've gone so subtle with my threads before and my little plot hooks that I try to present, that I've had the player outright say, what else is there? That was when I realized I was too subtle. And then I had to explain. I just explained outright, like, here is everything that I've been presenting. Here are your options. You know, what do you want to do from those? And they were like, oh, I didn't get all those options. I didn't pick up on those. And it happens. So look for the little threads, look for the little hints that your DM drops, and pick them up, pull at them, because you never know what those threads might lead to. You might be asked to go collect some sheep for the farmer when the sheep go missing. The missing sheep might lead to some werewolves killing the sheep in the forest, and those werewolves might lead to a bigger, greater adventure further down the line. And it all starts because you met one farmer who was complaining about his missing sheep to his neighbor, and you decided to ask what was going on. This video is supposed to only be 5 tips, but I have one more bonus tip for you, for the players. Try to be a GM at least once. It doesn't mean you have to be sucked into running games constantly, but there is a difference of information or a different perspective that you take on once you step into the DM seat. When you are preparing a one-shot for your players and you've never been a DM before, you will probably over-prepare. You're going to think of all the different story twists and hooks and things and try to make them as big and great as you can. But once you step into the DM seat and you think, you know, you take on that role for even just a little bit, it changes your perspective of the game. It lets you be able to define what you enjoy from a player, when you see it from the other side of the screen. And then you yourself can become that player that you like to play as or play with. And you might not have noticed it unless you ran a game once. So those and that rambling are my 5.5 tips to be a better role player in tabletop role-playing games. What are your favorite tips for players, for new players, for experienced players? What do you think of that makes players better for you? Let me know in the comments below. If you're new to the channel, thanks for joining in and making it this far through the video. You'll find a lot more content here on the channel about player guides, DM guides, and tips and tricks. Even more, if you want to join Discord, I have a Discord server where we can talk D&D. It's kind of slow sometimes, but when the conversation strikes up, it's pretty good conversation. If you need some minis, I'm also your guy for minis. I have a shop called Adventures in 3D. The link will be in the description. If you need tabletop game miniatures, you can go check that out. Order some. I 3D print them and ship them to you. I have a whole catalog, and it's growing every single day. So go check that out as well. And if you use the code RPGDaily10 on checkout, you can get 10% off. That's pretty good. And then I know you came from here, so check it out. And with all that said, I've been Richard. Thanks for watching.